All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Soldiers Memorial's monthly challenge chat. Great to have you here, virtually at least. So I just want to thank you for taking some time out of your day to join me today. Today is we're going to talk, just kind of give you a brief history of Veterans Day, which is actually the more I dug into it, the more interesting it got. It's definitely not a straightforward story. There's some interesting twists and turns into it, but I'll walk you through it and we'll kind of make some sense of it. And then at the end, we'll talk a little bit about how Veterans Day is different than some of the other, I would say, military-related holidays. But before we begin, I want to just give a quick thank you to our members. Members are what make everything happen. Your support is deeply appreciated. It enables things like this challenge chat, enables other exhibit development, program development, both here at Soldiers Memorial, but then also up at the Missouri History Museum in Forest Park and at the Library and Research Center on Skinker Boulevard. So thank you to our members. And at the end of the session today, I will provide some membership information in the chat box. Just one more housekeeping thing. You'll notice that there's a Q&A box. If you're interested in asking a question, you can type your question into that box, and I will get to that at the end of the program. I'm flying solo today. We have a little bit of a staffing crunch. So just to let you know, it's just me, and it'll take me a little bit of time to get that stuff entered into the Q&A box. But we're looking forward to a good day and a good time talking about Veterans Day. And one final thing, I want to give a shout out to Beelman Trucking Company. Beelman very generously contributes to sponsoring these challenge chat programs and other programming at Soldiers Memorial. Boy, talk about an industry that has certainly helped us more now than ever during this time of when we're all relying on shipments home and getting packages and things of that nature. So a big shout out to all those who are working hard to keep everything running in this country. Again, I'm Mark Sullivan, the director here at Soldiers Memorial, and I'm going to give you just a brief history of Veterans Day. Veterans Day really begins at the end of World War I in 1918, as the war was, of course, the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. Germany gave up and the fighting ended. The armistice was agreed to, and that was the kind of the beginning of what we now know as Veterans Day. Of course, the announcement of that armistice caused parties. People were absolutely elated. There was parading in the streets. Here's an image from our Missouri Historical Society collection. And you can see this image taken down on what is now Tucker or 12th Street. But these parades on the November 11th, 1918 were more or less spontaneous. This is looking north, actually, on Olive from 12th Street. So this is what the photographer William Peters took these photographs, and he took a number of them throughout the city, and he kind of conveniently not only included their location but their time. This was taken at 1:50 p.m. So you can see just kind of great rejoicing and celebration at the signing of the armistice. Here's some this truck just loaded up with kids and other kind of revelers, as Peters called them, rolling down near Jefferson and Clark Avenue. And this he records is happening at 1:25 p.m. So again, just lots of celebrating and hooting and hollering and having a very grateful and joyous time that the armistice had finally been reached. And these women here, again from the William Peters collection, you didn't go downtown without your flag and your noisemaker. Those were two things that folks had with them. You see these women with their flags, their little paper horns. They got flags in their hats. They got flags in their hands. They got some ribbons draped across their shoulders. You can see it's a little bit chilly. They got their heavy overcoats on, but they were ready to party. And here's another image of those folks. So great time of celebration. Here's another image. This one's taken from the Post Dispatch building, looking south on 12th Street and into this large mass of people who, like I said, these parades were more or less spontaneous. They weren't, you know, we think about the parades today, and how they're very orderly, and folks are lined up nicely on the side of the road, and they take months to plan and develop, and that obviously was not the case when the armistice was signed. There was just a great outpouring of people into the streets to celebrate and mark the end of the Great War. One other photo here. This is again near the Post Dispatch building on 12th, or what is now Tucker. And I think we're seeing Pershing and Wilson on those large poster boards there. So 1919, the war's over in 18, and we're rolling into 1919. Especially in May of that month, a lot of the soldiers were returning, so they were having these parades down Tucker through what they called the Court of Honor. And we have one of these images, actually one from this these events that is blown up large scale here at Soldiers Memorial. It's fun to dig into it and see all the things that you can see, but this hopefully gives you a little bit of an idea. This is the mounted police, the 128th parade passing through the Court of Honor. And this was on April 29th, 1919. And then the next one here, you can see this is May 4th, so just a few days later. These are the 110th Motor Supply Company at Linville and Grand Avenue. So again, just another image of these kind of parades that were happening as the soldiers were returning stateside from Europe. I love this photograph, especially this young boy on the right side of the photograph, who just seems kind of in awe at the 110th Motor Supply Company as they're marching down the street there. But just a great image. This is another image. This landscape, at least on our side of the street here, as we look at this photo, hasn't really changed a whole lot from today. The photo is taken from City Hall. So Municipal Courts building would be on the left side of this photo that you can't see. But most dramatically, across the street, if any of you are familiar with Soldiers Memorial, at the top of the photo where you see all of those structures, that of course now is where our Court of Honor is, and where the World War II and Vietnam and Korean War memorials are to those who from St. Louis who gave their lives in those conflicts. So it's a great image, and it shows the dramatic transformation of from what was all these homes and houses and industry and companies into what is now Memorial Plaza and the Court of Honor. And these gentlemen here are actually on the east side of the Municipal Courts building, in between the Municipal Courts building and the City Hall. And this is the 12th Engineers receiving medals from the city of St. Louis. You see, if you notice some of the dates on these photographs, this is May 13th, this is May 9th, May 4th on this one. So this is just all of these soldiers coming back. Here's May 30th. Again, another image taken from the top of City Hall, looking into that, what they call that Court of Honor, which is that stretch of Tucker there, or what they knew as 12th Street. But really, these kind of parades are happening, and kind of not spontaneously, but as the soldiers were returning. So there's this constant presence of these parades. And then, of course, on November 11th, 1919, Wilson kind of declares that day to be known as Armistice Day, and that's kind of when it gets its title, or what it would be known, at least for a couple more decades, or a few more decades really, was Armistice Day, which was a day to recognize the end of the war. And really Wilson kind of gave it these overtones of peace, and it was a day that it was to recognize and kind of be grateful for peace. And that was kind of the focus of Armistice Day. And of course, it was tied to the end of World War I, which is an extremely significant day on the calendar, this November 11th, 1919. But it has this focus of, you know, it's not mourning those who were lost during the war, although there were probably aspects of that. And it's not a purely celebratory thing, an event, but it is one that is grateful, and it's meant to kind of honor the idea of peace. And then we get to, and it's the first year that there's a major parade. So it's the Armistice Day Parade in 1919. You can see this article from the St. Louis Star and Times. Interesting thing with this is you got the veterans from all the previous, well, not all the previous wars, but the then recent previous wars, World War I, what they termed the Spanish War, what we would now call a Spanish-American War, and the Civil War. Also, women war workers were in the parade, as well as Red Cross nurses and others took part in the parade. But the parade, coupled with singing patriotic songs and speeches at the Coliseum, were kind of the backbone of that day and the major aspects of that Memorial Day event. The American Legion was, you know, is a fresh and new organization. Their slogan or slogan for that parade in that year was "Back on the Job," which was, you know, these were young men who had served in conflict and had come home and were now back on the job and looking to get back into their routines. It was also, you know, becomes a day when city offices, courts, and other businesses close, at least for a short time, if not for the full day. We move into 1921, so a couple years later, Missouri declares Armistice Day to be a legal holiday, and they put a special emphasis on labor and labor unions joining with the Legion, the American Legion, to unite and then again celebrate that peace, this idea of a peaceful world and the end of the Great World War. And then soon after, Harding actually declares Armistice Day as a national holiday. And you know, the headline here asking people to offer up silent prayer of thanks for the soldiers. Is the first time that it's recognized as a kind of a national holiday. It was also notable that year, 1921, it was the development of the Unknown Soldier monument or memorial in Arlington. And so this is a significant event, not only in Washington, D.C., but you can see here in St. Louis as well, the Unknown Soldier sleeping in Arlington, wearing the highest military decorations of the Allied nations. So again, this is the establishment of that memorial, and it's tied to World War I, and it has that very specific World War I focus. 1926, things change a little bit, and Congress passes a concurrent resolution which establishes November 11th as a recurring anniversary, and they specifically are requesting that the President of the U.S. Issue a proclamation calling upon officials to display the flag of the U.S. and invite all people to observe the day in schools and churches or other suitable places with appropriate ceremonies of friendly relations with all other people. So again, this emphasis on friendship, peace, and that idea, and the fact that they wanted to see this not just as a you know, kind of an informal thing, but wanted to establish the idea of it being a recurring anniversary that we perpetually kind of celebrate. Interestingly enough, that same year, 1926, was the year that the Coolidge came to Kansas City and to dedicate the completion of Liberty Memorial, which we know now as the National World War I Museum. You can see this image here with just these what the paper called a solid mass of humanity, just a tremendous gathering of people, the likes of which I certainly probably have never seen anything like that. But this completion of the Liberty Memorial, to come see that, see the president speak, but then also commemorate this day, November 11th, 1926. Coolidge's quote here I found compelling. Is he was there to place the official sanction of the national government upon one of the most elaborate and impressive memorials that adorn our country. It comes as a fitting observance of this 8th anniversary of the signing of the armistice on November 11th, 1918. In each recurring year, this day will be set aside to revive memories and renew ideals. So that's his kind of response to the Congressional Joint Resolution calling for this to be a recurring event and a recurring remembrance. 1938, so about 12 years later, this is Armistice Day becomes a legal holiday. November 11th is now a legal holiday. Roosevelt signed the bill. The Armistice Day was to be a legal holiday. And you can see the headlines here from both the Globe Democrat and the Post-Dispatch. So just small things in the paper, but it was a law that it joined with New Year's Day, Washington's birthday, Memorial Day, Independence Day, Labor Day, and Christmas as the only federal legal holidays. And again, with that emphasis that dedicated to the cause of a world peace, so that focus continued on celebrating peace and friendship during this day. Interestingly enough, in 1938, much like in 1926 when the Liberty Memorial opened, 1938 is when Soldiers Memorial opened, and you can see this image here from the Globe Democrat. This was actually not on Veterans Day, but on Memorial Day of that year, and 5,000, estimated 5,000 people came out to dedicate the opening of that our Soldiers Memorial. So just a great photo. I love all of the patriotic banners and the fabric hanging off the building with the red, white, and blue, and you kind of assume. So just a really kind of a neat photo, and to see 5,000 people coming to dedicate the opening of that. So another thing in 1938, along with the establishment of Armistice Day as a permanent federal legal holiday. And then after 1938, of course, things take a turn for the worse. The U.S. declares war on Berlin and Rome, and this was on December 11th, 1941. So we are now engaged in World War II, dramatic war. Obviously, you don't need to be told that, but it's a big deal. And of course, World War I was meant to be the war to end all wars, as they said, and World War II was sure to prove that wrong. So we're engaged in World War II, and then not soon after World War II, we are engaged on the Korean Peninsula in the Korean War. And here's the headline from June 26, 1950, from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. The U.S. backing the UN to stop the war in Korea and the unprovoked aggression. So two significant events. In 1954, so the Korean War ends in 1953, we see kind of the first real shift in course for the Armistice Day, or as it was known. And this is a proclamation from Eisenhower changing the name of Armistice Day to Veterans Day. And this was largely due because there was, they had this November 11th day, which was focused pretty much before World War II solely on World War I, but with World War II and then the Korean War, Eisenhower had this had the drive to change the day to be more inclusive and to not focus strictly on World War I, but to focus on all the wars and all of the efforts that have gone into these wars. And so, as he says here, he wants to expand the significance of that commemoration and pay appropriate homage to veterans of all of our wars and change the name to Veterans Day. And solemnly remember the sacrifices of all those who fought so valiantly on the seas, in the air, and on foreign shores, while also promoting an enduring peace. And finally, at the end there, he says, in order to ensure proper and widespread observance of this anniversary, all veterans organizations, and the entire citizenry will wish to join hands in the common purpose. So this is 1954 is the first real kind of big change to Armistice Day, and it's when we lose that name and take on Veterans Day. The 1954 parade in St. Louis must have just been an absolute spectacle to behold. The papers report that there were 10,000 veterans, members of patriotic organizations, school bands, drum and bugle corps. Were really in the 50s and the 60s. We're really getting into the height of the drum and bugle corps activity here in St. Louis and in other places as well across the country. But just a tremendous parade. They estimate a crowd of 200,000 people, one of the largest crowds ever. Again, this is 1954. There were 30 musical groups. The Black Knights of East St. Louis from AMVETS Post 121. They were one of those musical groups, and they were the 1954 AMVETS national champions. They actually went down to Florida to compete and win that championship. And the paper remarked that there were 17 Spanish-American War veterans still marching in the parade, and determinedly marched over the entire parade route. And then, of course, there was the tradition that once Soldiers Memorial is established and opened in 1938, it becomes the place for the pass and review for these parades and for all kinds of other activities related to Veterans Day and other days as well. And the parade lasted, the paper reported, about 53 minutes. And here's a photo of the Black Knights, the 1954 Drum and Bugle Corps that won that national championship. 1968, this is the next, Eisenhower in 54 changed the name of Veterans Day. 68 was an interesting year for Veterans Day and other holidays as well. And this, I think, is where this story might get most interesting, perhaps. But they passed the Uniform Monday Holiday Act, which I don't think very many people realize this, but it was basically an effort to establish the 3-day weekend, which we all know, and those of us working tend to love and cherish. I know I do. I love the 3-day weekend. It was an effort promoted and favored by the travel and tourism industry, but it essentially moved select federal holidays in the U.S. to Mondays. So Washington's birthday becomes the third Monday in February. Memorial Day becomes the last Monday in May. Labor Day, the first Monday in September. Columbus Day, which was established by this 1968 Act, was the second Monday in October. And for us, significantly today, Veterans Day was to be the fourth Monday in October. So Eisenhower had changed the name from Armistice Day to Veterans Day, and now there's this movement away from the traditional November 11th date to the fourth Monday in October. And this is going to have pretty significant ramifications, as I'll explain here in a minute. So I said, okay, so I wanted to see what happened in 1968 as far as the parade and the ceremonies that were happening here in St. Louis. And it wasn't a very good example because it was more or less rained and chilled out. It was too cold, it was too rainy they did carry on the parade, but I couldn't get a sense of how it compared to that tremendous 1954 parade where they said there were 10,000 participants and just people just deep on the sidewalk lined up to watch the parade. So I said, all right, let's take a look and see what was happening in 1967. I got curious, and it looks like it was a pretty significant parade, and you can see in this photo here from the Post-Dispatch, in the article that the Post-Dispatch ran, there were about 5,000 marchers. So the parade had, it was about half the size as it was from the previously reported 1954 parade, and the folks now are 2 to 3 deep on the sidewalk. So still a major event, major parade. The Drum and Bugle Corps, the especially from American Legion posts like the Tom Powell post up in North St. Louis. They were just had tremendous state championship drum and bugle corps, so they were still a big part of what was happening. So that kind of gave me a sense that Memorial Day, Veterans Day now was still, significantly celebrated, an important event in St. Louis. But then I wanted to look at 1969, again, curiosity kind of getting the better of me. And this was when it got very interesting. 69 is a tremendously, another very large parade, but part of the reason for that, or maybe a big reason for that, is veterans actually invited the public to join in the parade. And you can see these two articles from the Post-Dispatch. The Nixon supporters expanded the parade in St. Louis, and the opening paragraph of this is one of the largest crowds in several years to view the Veterans Day parade through downtown streets. Turned out yesterday largely as a gesture of support for the Vietnam War policies of President Richard M. Nixon. Officers of veterans organizations said they believed a major factor in the unusually large turnout was the prospect of major demonstrations against the war tomorrow and Friday. So this is the first, real obvious intersection between the Vietnam War and the Veterans Day events and parade that were happening here in St. Louis. So I was looking specifically to step back at 1968, because 68 is when the Monday Holiday Act was passed, and I wanted to see what effect it would have. Well, when that act was passed, it actually doesn't take effect until 1971. So then I wanted to jump ahead and see, okay, how has Veterans Day evolved by 1971? And then it gets very interesting again. It's the first year of the Monday Holiday Act, and the veterans from Vietnam specifically took part, some of them, obviously not all of them, some of them took part in discarding medals that they had earned during the war as a form of protest. So you can see this happening. And this actually happens right here at Soldiers Memorial, on the steps of Soldiers Memorial, where they're boxing up and sending back their medals to the President of the United States. And this was and you'll note the date on this is 25 October 1971. So it's not that traditional. This is the first year where Veterans Day was not celebrated on November 11th. It was on this 25 October 1971. And then the backlash begins, and you start to see this reported in the papers. And the veterans organizations, which have typically been a strong presence in St. Louis, start to kind of voice objections to this. And the article here notes that the celebration of Veterans Day on November 11th instead of October 25th is under consideration by St. Louis members of the American Legion. So they basically were considering going it alone and saying, we're not in line with this Monday holiday, because they had the strong connection to November 11th, which goes all the way back to the armistice of World War I. And so you can see one of the quotes here: at our luncheon prior to Veterans Day parade, a proposal suggesting a return to the November 11th Armistice Day date was discussed. Men from both big wars favored November 11th. Their argument was that the day means something, while October 25th meant only a 3-day holiday. It was, quote, it was like changing Christmas to make a 3-day holiday. So there's a very strong emotional connection to the November 11th date. And I think the US government and this, the Monday holiday plan, while we all love our 3-day holidays, I think they didn't think this one through very well when they thought about changing Veterans Day, and that it could be just on any day. That they missed the connection to the very importance of that 11th day of the 11th month. By 1972, it's starting to intensify. You can see Joe Matthews here, the head of the Legion, they're really getting more vocal and more aggressive about the change to Monday. And he's quoted here as the American Legion believes we should be true to the history that surrounds the date, November 11th, the annual reminder that on that date in 1918, the most terrible war the world had known up to that time came to an end. So not only does Veterans Day carry all these other meanings, but they're arguing that we can't lose sight and focus on the fact that this day was very important and it has a very specific meaning. By 1972, this is the first year, is from what I can tell, that there was not a Veterans Day parade. And this, it's part of it is certainly has to do with this switch to the Monday holiday. I think that, my suspicion is that there's the difficulties presented by the Vietnam War are probably compounding this. So the Legion, they're quoted in the paper anyways, which had formally sponsored the parade and really been the driving force behind the parade, said it was canceled because of a lack of interest. The article goes on to say, where all these other businesses and schools and whatnot are being closed. And then at the end, there's a little blurb that says an observance will be held in St. Louis, but not until November 11th, when veterans here will sponsor a flag raising ceremony at Soldiers Memorial. So I think the Monday event, Vietnam, all of these things are compounding to really have a significant impact on the Veterans Day, especially the parade aspect of Veterans Day here in St. Louis. And they, it's gone from 1954 when you had these 10,000 participants and, countless others who were watching the parade. It's gone from that in less than 20 years. The Legion is stating that it's canceled because of a lack of interest, and that they will, however, hold a flag raising ceremony at Soldiers Memorial, so significantly scaled back. And then the commander in the article there on the right, you can see the commander of the American Legion's 11th district. It just says we're ignoring it. We're ignoring the Veterans Day that was established by the Monday Holiday Act, and saying, this real kind of disgust that there's just no significance to this day. November 11th was originally Armistice Day. So today, October 22nd, it means nothing to us. And maybe Congress will decide to change it back to the original date. So again, intensifying anger and frustration over this change. 74 and 75 is when, government kind of wakes up and recognizes that we need to switch this back, that this was a bad move. So a lot of states had already done this and said that, this is silly, we're going back to the November 11th, and then the federal government kind of catches up with them in 1975. And then you can see in 75 what it's the return of the parade, but interestingly, it's not anywhere near where it had been in previous years. In fact, it's at the last paragraph there, you'll see the parade will begin at Compton Avenue and Cherokee Street, and will go east on Cherokee to Jefferson Avenue. Participants will include members of veterans organizations, military units, civic and patriotic groups. So really from 1971 through 74, the parade kind of disappears, and then it attempts to make a comeback in 1975 for the first time, and it becomes known as an observance, which is tied with activities here at Soldiers Memorial, usually on the Chestnut Street side of the building. So that's kind of it. It goes from celebrating the end of World War I to the declaration that we should have this day, and it should be a day when we think of peace and kind of harmony. And then it becomes Congress then declares that it should be recurring. It goes from that, and then after World War II and the Korean War, Eisenhower changes it to Veterans Day and changes the focus a little bit away from World War I to be more inclusive of all wars and service members. And then, of course, the 1968 Monday Holidays Act has a tremendous impact on it, on the day, by attempting to move the date that it's recognized and celebrated. So that's kind of where it is today. Part of this conversation I was having with a coworker was, kind of what is Veterans Day today? And I would say that it has changed quite a bit. And it's not, while we do, remember World War I, we do remember the different conflicts. There is a much greater emphasis put on just recognizing and basically thanking veterans. It's a day that is different from some of the other military related holidays. One of those being Armed Forces Day, which is the third Saturday in May. Armed Forces Day essentially honors those who are serving. So those who are active, maybe in the reserve or in the guard, but are still wearing the uniform on a regular basis. So thanking and honoring those who are serving. It began in 1950, and that was after the establishment of the consolidation of the military service under the U.S. Department of Defense, and it's kind of a move to it was trying to eliminate, each branch. There's a great deal of branch pride, and each branch kind of has its own special day or birthday usually. And the creation of Armed Forces Day was an attempt to kind of eliminate those days, and that didn't work. The branches still proudly celebrate their own unique days, but that's the reason why we have an Armed Forces Day today, and it's an excellent opportunity to thank those who are serving. Memorial Day is the last Monday of May, and it's started out as Decoration Day, and that is decorating the graves of those who we have lost in service. So this is very different from Armed Forces Day. This is honoring people who have, either given their lives in combat or have died otherwise in service, to honor and mourn those. It's of the 3 days, Armed Forces Day, Memorial Day, and Veterans Day. Memorial Day is unique in that it puts the emphasis and the focus on honoring those who lost their lives. It's the most reverent, I would say, of the 3 days. And Veterans Day is November 11th. As you can see, it's changed a bit over the years, but today it's mostly about honoring and thanking those who have served and have survived and not, lost their lives as for Memorial Day, but those who have served in the U.S. Armed Forces. So unique from Armed Forces Day, those who are serving, Memorial Day, those who have lost their lives in service, and Veterans Day, those who have served, and it's their kind of special day. But I would say any day is a good day to thank a veteran. It's a good day to thank those who are serving, and it's a good day to respect and honor the memory of those who have died while in service. I'm going to close it up there. I'd be happy to take questions and answer any questions. Again, I want to thank you for taking some time to join us. Of course, Veterans Day will be November 11th next week. So we will be hosting what we're calling a virtual parade, which isn't really much of a parade at all, but it's a video of individuals and groups who have participated in past parades. We enabled a platform basically for them to thank veterans and to show their support during these challenging times. And I'm sure if we can get this COVID under control and things kind of back to normal, that there will be a significant effort next year in 2021 to have a Veterans Day with elements of a parade and celebration and a time to get together and kind of commune and come together again. But for this year, we will be doing the virtual words of thanks from different organizations and members. You can see there's the membership information, mohistory.org/support if you're interested in becoming a member and supporting us that way. And you can also take a brief survey, and that pop-up will open in your browser following the closure of this Zoom platform. Happy to take any questions if there are any questions or comments. All right, I'm not seeing any questions. That's either maybe a good thing or maybe not. Here's one. Oh, got one comment. This was my first Zoom with Missouri Historical Society, and a thank you. So thank you for attending. Certainly there's these challenge chats that are recurring, but then also there's a whole slate of programming, not only through Soldiers Memorial, but through the Missouri History Museum. And if you go to the mohistory.org and the events webpage, you can certainly find some more information and programs that you might be interested in. And another question, lots of good info. What is your favorite Veterans Day memory? I think back actually to the, I don't know if this is a single memory, but when we were cadets at the Air Force Academy, we didn't get Veterans Day off the first couple of years. And it was always a point of grievance and a point of confusion. Although we weren't veterans, so it definitely wasn't our day. It felt like it had a strong enough military connection. I think by the time I was a senior or a junior, they changed that and began giving us the day off, which was met with great happiness, obviously. But that's one thing that always comes to mind when I think about Veterans Day. But I also, as a veteran, I kind of have fun with you know, one of the features of Veterans Day nowadays is so many of these restaurants and coffee shops and different places give out specials to veterans. So that's always fun too. And it's just kind of, you go out and get your free coffee or whatever is always a kind of a treat. And it's I never used to really engage with that stuff, but it kind of became a fun little thing to do. And but that's kind of a neat recognition that businesses do in a way that they get involved, again, to thank veterans, and really emphasizing the change, how that holiday has evolved into you know, something very different than celebrating the end of World War I and peace, into, you know, being just generally thankful to veterans and those who have served, and thanking them in countless different ways. So maybe I think that's it for the questions. So I want to thank you all for attending, and remind you that any day is a good day to thank a vet, to remember those who have lost their lives in service, and to thank those who are serving. So thank you for joining us, and we'll look forward to seeing you again virtually, I'm sure, and then and sooner or later, probably a little bit later, we'll get together in person again. So be safe and take care. Thank you.